I think today we are going to look at when I thought about this topic of delimitation and limitations, right, including also the assumptions of the research study, I was thinking about the writing up to say in your different documents, how do you write up this aspect, especially the first two, which are your delimitations and the limitations. How do you position them in your two documents, which are your research proposal and also your research report? That's where I was looking at. Well, those who are doing honors, definitely, it's a different story because you have to put them in your assignment and all of those things. But when you do your master's and your PhD, I got some few arguments about these two topics, which I'm going to share with you. So if you don't agree with me, it's fine, but I think I've read widely about them. So maybe my argument is based on empirical evidence. All right. So I think today we look at that topic. Well, there are outcomes which I've developed. The first one is that by the end of this workshop, we should be able to understand what the delimitation, limitations, and assumptions of the study are. And also the other outcome is that you need to be able to give a distinction between delimitation and theory a little bit there, and also be aware with limitations that a researcher could encounter. In other words, you as a researcher, you could encounter some of the limitations, okay? And also be able to distinguish the different types of assumptions. We also need to understand the scope of the study, all right? Basically, the introductory statements of the scope of the study, it should cover some of this aspect. In the scope of your study, you need to include the impact of your study, all right? What impact will this research have or this study have in general? And also, you need to include who is going to be affected by your study. That's why we always have what you call the population and the sample. Those are the people who are going to be involved. And also, if, for example, you are going to conduct this study in a certain type of communities, you need also to identify those communities. The impact also is very important of the study, all right? What benefits will this research or this study have, and the impact which it could have? Because we are arguing that when you do research, we need to think about the benefits and the impact. We are not just going up and coming with all those nice topics or titles, but they don't have impact and benefit. They must have they need to benefit someone, or they need to benefit certain communities. That's why we are doing research most of the time. And also, you need to include the timeline, all right? And I think when I look at my students, especially when they do their research proposal, they don't think about the timeline. Timeline is very important, because if you don't have a timeline, then you're saying your research is going to take 3 years. What will you be doing in that 3 years? You need to have timeline, because the timeline also assists you to be able to be engaged with your study and your research, so that you can see whether you are ahead of the time or you are behind. So you are able to control yourself to say, look, here, because the ethics permission which was granted to me by the institution, it asked me to do the research over 3 years, where I am now after 2 years. Because if you don't complete within 3 years, definitely it's a problem, because the ethics permission also expires. I think most of you, those who have their ethical clearance, they have seen that they give you 3 years to do your study. So if you don't do the study within 3 years, you are going to have a trouble with that, okay? I want us first to understand these two concepts. The first one, I want us to understand delimitations. What are the limitations of the study, right? What I've realized is that sometimes we confuse the delimitation and the limitations. And when I do some of the external examination of some of the students' work, well, I don't penalize them, honestly. All right, sometimes I just comment about it in the report and so on, because there's no way I can penalize a student for only one aspect. If a student is doing a PhD, where you are reading almost 400 and something pages. So I just make a note in my report. But let's understand what are the limitations first. If you look at Creswell described the limitations as follows. He says, Delimitation are parameters that assist the researcher in establishing the boundaries. I think Creswell speaks about the boundaries, and also when he talks about the delimitation, he said those are the exceptions, reservations, and qualifications that are inherent to the study. Delimitation is characterized as shortcomings. Those are things which are on a negative aspect. They are shortcomings that could place restriction either on methodology or conclusion. All right. And I like it the way Theophindius and the colleague puts it there. Hence, this notion that the findings could not be generalized. If you spoke about generalization of the findings, we are always looking at the delimitation. To say, I can't generalize these findings. The results of this study cannot be generalized because of this and that and that. One, for example, if I conduct my research in South Africa only, I can't generalize to say my findings are happening across the globe because there is a delimitation there. Okay, that's why you always have this notion of generalization of the study. So the study cannot be generalized. It comes from there because of the delimitations. But delimitations are those characteristics that limit the scope and define the boundaries of your study. The delimitations are in your control. Please make note of that. All right, you are the one as a researcher who have come with these delimitations. No one else. They're not coming from outside. But when you look at your limitations, you do not have control over them. But you can control the delimitations. Okay? So if I can control my delimitations, it means that as a student, when I write my research proposal, I can talk about the delimitations because they are on my control. Remember that we have two documents here. You have a research proposal and your research report. Those are the two different types of documents, okay? Your research proposal, basically, it's something which you intend to do. It's something which you are telling us that you'll be doing this and that and that. You have not done it. If you say to me, I'm going to conduct this research and I'm going to use qualitative methods, you have not already collected data or used qualitative methods. It's an intention. It's something which you are intending to do. But your research report, you are reporting now about what you have done. If in my research proposal I've said I'm going to use qualitative methods, when I report, I must tell the reader, how did I use these qualitative methods? So now the delimitation says to you are things which you can control. I'm the one who decided to do this study. I'm the one who decided to have this study as a focus on a certain area only. I have control over that. But limitations, I don't have control over them because I don't know what's going to happen after I've been given a permission to conduct research. I'm going to encounter the limitations when I've conducted my research. Then I'll say my limitations were this and that and that. I don't know, colleagues, if you understand what I'm trying to explain here between these two different concepts. So I argue personally, and I argue because even the empirical evidence tells me to say, look, the limitations, yes, I can include them under my research proposal. But I can't put my limitations. I know that students are putting also in their research proposal the limitations and limitation. It's fine, but my understanding is that if you want to put and share also your limitations in your research proposal, maybe you rather describe what limitations are, not identifying those limitations in your research proposal. Because if you identify them in your research proposal, from my side as a researcher, I believe that you are preempting. In other words, you are focusing. What will happen if that limitation does not come up when you are doing your research report, when you are reporting or doing your normal conducting your study there on the field? If I say, this is an example. If I say one of my limitations is going to be gatekeeping, then I write that in my research proposal. What am I doing there? I am preempting that I'll have a challenge with gatekeeping. Then now they give me ethical clearance. They go and conduct my research, collect my data, and all to find that when I want to go to the site or get information from the participant, there was no gatekeeping. So what will happen with that aspect, which I've said there will be gatekeeping? So it's better because remember that your research proposal is your chapter 1. So already in your chapter 1, when you write your report, you have already identified the issue of gatekeeping. And what will happen when you go to chapter 3, in your research methodology, when you expand on delimitation and limitations, there is no gatekeeping. So you can see that there's no alignment between the document. You have said something on a chapter 1, but in your chapter 3, it's something different. So the best thing which we can do for now, we can put these two concepts in our research proposal. It's fine. But the other one, especially limitation, just describe them. Describe what are limitations. What authors are telling us about limitations. So that when you get that permission, like I've said, when you're going to write up the report now, you indicate all those limitations. So let's quickly look at this aspect. The third bullet talks about the delimiting factors. They can include some of these aspects, the choice of objectives, the research questions, variable interest, and so on and so on. But look at the last bullet there. It says delimitation further refers to the boundaries of the research study arising from the researcher's decision of what to exclude. Then I'm trying to give up a little bit of writing up here, okay? Before that, there's a point there which says delimitations are what you are going to study or what your study will focus on. Then I'm giving an example of a topic here. Let's say my topic is as follows. It says perceptions of the school governing bodies on learners bullying, a case of Tshwane North District in Gauteng. That's a topic. So now when I write my limitation, my delimitation, how can I put my delimitation in my research proposal? I can write it as follows. The delimitation of this research study is that it focuses only on learners within Tshwane District of Gauteng Province. It's a delimitation because remember that I'm not focusing on other districts. I'm not focusing in any other province. It's Gauteng. So that's a delimitation. Then I can go further and write up in my document to say why learner bullying is experienced by most of the learners across the 15th district in Gauteng province. So my reader will say, definitely this study or this research, it has a delimitation. So therefore, the next sentence which I can put there, I could say the results of this study cannot be generalized. I can't generalize across all the other 14 districts. No, because I focus only on one district. I didn't look at the other district, even though Gauteng province have 15 districts, but I look at one. So I can't generalize. But it doesn't mean that, colleagues, when you say the result or findings of this study cannot be generalized, it doesn't mean that your results and findings are not important. They are important because you may find that what we have found in your study, when you conduct this research only in this one district, it's more applicable to other districts. You may find that the issue of bullying is not only happening here in this district only, it's also happening in the other 14 districts. That's why when you go to the limitations, it's where you expand that aspect also. And also here, that's why I've said why learner bullying is experienced by most of the learners across the 15th district. So even though I said my findings cannot be generalized, I still argue as a writer to say definitely this concept of this problem of learner bullying, it's a serious phenomena across all the 15 districts. So it means my study also is going to assist the other 15 districts, or maybe all the 9 provinces, because the study is not my outcome or the results of my study in the form of a dissertation or thesis is not only going to be read by people from Gauteng, it's going to be read globally. Some of them may find that they are coming from within South Africa in other provinces. So in other words, though I cannot generalize my findings, still my findings are important. So that's the writing I was talking about, colleagues. Delimitation are the exclusions in a study in general. Okay. It also narrows the scope of the research. Think about that topic which I've just given you. All right. It's focusing only on one area. So it means my research scope is being narrowed. Whatever I'm going to talk about here in my study, I'm going to focus more on learner bullying within this district, which is in Gauteng. So my scope is more narrowed. It doesn't mean that you are not going to read widely. Definitely you're going to read widely. All right. But remember that how my research is being narrowed. The population, the sample which I'm going to use, and the population are going to come from these perimeters. I'm going to look at teachers from the North District. I think it's Tshwane North District within Gauteng province. In other words, my population is going to come there. My sample especially is going to come there. I'm not going to sample from another district. So my scope is narrowed, all right? I may go to other districts. For example, if I want to do piloting, all right, I can say, all right, let me just pilot this data collection instrument in another district. Maybe I can go to Eguruleni, South or whatever, if there's something like that. But when I do my writing up, it's focused more at Tshwane North District. Population, narrow it down by explaining why you have chosen specific respondents in your research. I think in delimitation also, if you say delimitations is about certain populations, you need to indicate why you have chosen that population. But most of the time when we look at the delimitations, sometimes you then put delimitation according to population. We just put, for example, the issue of methodology to say, okay, maybe my study is delimited because of this. I'm going to use one method, which is qualitative. Okay, it's one of the delimitations. You can also include the sampling method. All right, I can say also one of my delimitation is that in this study, I'm going to use one sample method. For example, I could say I'll be using, because my study is qualitative, I'll be using only qualitative sampling methods, which is aligning to purposive sampling technique. So it means now I limit my sampling technique there. So I can write it as one of the delimitations. Remember that most of the time, when you write delimitations, I don't mind if my students, they don't put them in the form of a paragraph. Then you just put point forms. It doesn't matter. I always like point forms, by the way. All right? When you indicate your delimitations and also when you indicate your limitations. The first point in my delimitation is that the study is focusing on in only one district, which is Tshwane North District, even though there are almost 15 districts in Gauteng province. It's the first point. The second one, maybe it could be an issue of methodology. Right? Maybe another delimitation, it could be this aspect. You can also have one delimitation. Doesn't matter. You don't have need to include more than one. If you say you put one delimitation, like I always do, I just put only one delimitation. And I take my delimitation from my title most of the time. You also have to include if you were able to come up with a number of respondents that you took from the population of your study. All right, let's park that one for now. I just want to check what Manto is saying here. On the chart, it says, how does one tackle the issue of delimitation when the research is relating to analysis of particular legislation? That is National Health Act, Labor Relation Act. Okay, I think it's more about, the study is more in a certain field, but remember that in regards to the delimitation, I'm not saying that your delimitation should be only based on your research title. No, you can have a delimitation. Maybe your delimitation in your case, it's an issue of methodology. Then you tell us that the delimitation of this study is because I'm using this method, and the reason why it becomes a delimitation is this and that. You can also use an issue of methodology, okay? It can be an issue of maybe delimitation based on the research question. So what I'm trying to say here, we don't say you must position or write up your delimitation base it on the research title only. It was just an example I was giving. Okay. So I think you'll have one or two delimitation in your research, honestly. Let's quickly look at limitations. I think my argument, all of you have heard me. All right. Now let's look at what limitations are. Those are the things which you don't have control over. Remember that delimitation and limitation. Delimitation, you have control. Where limitation, we do not have control. Think about this before we go to this theory. How many of us thought that in 2019 we'll have a pandemic, if I can put it that way? And we didn't see it coming. All right? It just came like that from China. Then in South Africa, we also have to smell the coffee, and went globally. No one knew about that. And it's one of the limitations. I think I've given you an example with one of the students in the past, when the student in the research proposal, the student indicated that she was going to conduct data using questionnaire, and is going to serve the questionnaire to the schools so that the schools can give it to the teachers. Because of COVID, the student could not go to schools. So the student came with another way of conducting that research and use another sample technique, all right, which was snowballing. So that is one of the limitations. In her study, in a research master's report, she wrote COVID as one of the limitations, as one of a limitation. And she elaborated why COVID was a limitation. She indicated that she has to use another sample technique, which was not approved. But she went further and indicated that the agreement was between herself and also the supervisor. So it's one of the limitations. Limitations are things which you don't have control over them. You cannot predict them. You cannot predict that you will have gatekeeping. You cannot predict that you will have a problem with access of information. You can't predict that. Those are the things which you are going to see them when you have already passed the stage of writing the research proposal and you already have your ethical clearance with you and you start now to conduct the real research. Then you report about those things. The limitation of the study are the constraints on generalization, applications to practice, and utilizing of findings. They point out strengths and weaknesses of the research. Okay? Remember that even though we say there are limitations, they don't make your study to have a weakness. No. Instead, they assist your study to have more empirical writing and also empirical evidence, because you are telling me as a reader to say, look, one of the conditions at the master's level, those who are doing masters, we want to check that we are able to do independent research. It's one of the conditions in masters. So if you are able to think beyond your research proposal when you are faced with other limitations, it shows that now you are maturing as a researcher. So it does not bring any weakness in your study, honestly. They are out of your control as a researcher. The importance of the limitation are that there are opportunities to make suggestions for further research. Right? In other words, you can also take some of the limitations which you have and try to position or put them under your sections where you talk about future research. Okay? All studies have limitations. Colleagues, I'm telling you, you can't conduct research. And in your study, when you do your research report, you don't identify any of the limitations. There should be one. All right? Maybe the limitation comes from you as a researcher. Maybe it was time. Right? Maybe it was an issue of time constraint. It could be a limitation also. Okay, let me give you a chance, Nomsa. Do you want to say something?
Yes, Dr. Kubega, thank you so much. So far, I'm thoroughly enjoying this. My question to you, I just want a bit of clarification. You mentioned limitations and this care. I don't know whether, am I hearing you right? Does this have an impact on the ethical clearance? Maybe let me just make an example, just so maybe I'm assured that I'm on the right path. So for my ethical clearance, I've mentioned that I am going to do face-to-face interviews with my participants. And for example, maybe there's an outbreak, like currently right now, there's smallpox, there's this flu, COVID, whatever, and you find that maybe where my participants are based, there's that outbreak. So then I opt maybe for either Teams or going as far as doing a telephonic WhatsApp conversation. Obviously that's a limitation. How does it impact the ethical clearance, or how I'm supposed to be conducting the study? I don't know if I'm making sense.
No, you're making sense. And I like that example because I'm allowing you to give your personal example so that maybe other students will understand where we are going to with this issue of limitations and delimitations. Remember that what we have said when you're looking at ethical clearance and ethics, we said what you have included in your research proposal, you are allowed to have minor changes. Okay? In your case, your intention was to do face-to-face interviews, but now there's this epidemic. It's not a pandemic, by the way, né? Epidemic. All right? I think all of us understand the difference between pandemic and epidemic. Smallpox is an epidemic, right? Because it can affect only a certain region or a certain area. But the pandemic, it affects the whole world, and in fact, everyone's been affected in regards to pandemic. So, how to mediate this type of writing up, especially so that we are still within your ethical clearance permission which you have been granted by the institution and so on. You have to liaise with your supervisor and have a discussion so that the supervisor will also give a go-ahead to say, look now, I as a researcher, the intention according to the ethical clearance which was granted to me was that I'm going to do face-to-face interviews, but because of this limitation, which you are going to include it also in your writing up for your research report, why we have decided to move from face-to-face to have your interviews in the form of online Teams or WhatsApp and so on. You justify that also in your writing up as a limitation regarding your when you write up your research report. One of the limitation was this and that, okay? So, but before you can opt, my advice to you, before you can opt and collect your data in a different mode, instead of using face-to-face, you need to liaise with your supervisor. That's how it works. So that you and your supervisor, you are on the same page, right? Otherwise, if you do it alone, it can have a serious implication in your study. Because remember that when we do ethical clearance, we are also familiar with, when we do external examination for any student's document, we are also familiar with the ethical clearance which you have been granted. That's why am I familiar with that as an external examiner? When you submit your research report, Those appendixes which you should put at the back, ethical clearance is one of that. So I'll be looking at that also. Yes, even though it doesn't talk details about some of the aspects, but I've got the right to find out about that. But my advice to you is that to be on the safe side, liaise with your supervisor with that regard. It works better in that way. Okay.
Thank you, Doctor. Highly appreciate.
It's a pleasure. Well, there are possible methodological limitations, all right? It could be an issue of sample size. It could also be a limitation. It could constrain in findings, the significance relationship, and also lack of available or reliable data could cause the researcher to limit the scope of the analysis. Okay? If, for example, you don't have enough data, you're not able to get more data from a participant, it could also be a limitation. All right? That's why we say to you, as a researcher, I think I've spoken about this in some of the past presentations, to say when you collect data, don't collect data only from your sample. All right? If, for example, I've said the sample size is going to be 30 participants, I should collect data beyond that. I can collect data from the whole population. Let's say the population of the school is 1,000 teachers. All right, that's an example. Then I say the sample size is 30. So I'm not supposed to go to the school and collect data only from 30 teachers. No, I'll collect data to all of the teachers. All right, from all of them. Then from there, the one which I'm going to use, I'm going to sample it to date. The reason why I don't focus only on 30 teachers, so that if there are some challenges with the data which I've collected, I still have available backup data which I can use. Because I won't go back to the school and say, look, I've collected data from 30 teachers and this information was not usable. Can I come again and collect another data? They won't allow you. So at least I've got enough backup data to use if the data I'm trying to use is not usable. So it works better in that way. But the other one, it could be an issue of self-reported data. I think all of us, we understand what is self-reported data and how does it come. All right. Basically, what we normally do, we always like, especially in quantitative studies, where we issue up a survey or a questionnaire, we always like to use a Likert scale, right? We use a Likert scale. And most of the time, we use a Likert scale of 3. Sometimes it's 4, sometimes it's 5, sometimes it's 2, okay? But if you use 3, for argument's sake, you put it as follows. Maybe number 1, you say number 1 is agree, number 2, neutral, number 3, disagree. The self-reported data comes from where? Where most of your participants are going to choose neutral. That's self-reported. Because remember that as participant, they want to please you as a researcher. All right? They don't want to say they agree with this point or they disagree with this point. They say, I'm in between. Then it comes a self-reported data. But we are not saying that data is not usable. We are going to use it, honestly. That's why most of the time we say, in my case, when I analyze qualitative data, and I've used maybe 3 Likert scale or even 5, then I have neutral or not sure. I'll always align that one to disagree. I'm not saying you are agreeing, right? I always count that numbers with the one who said they disagree, all right? I align it to the right, not to the left, okay? So how does it come here in regards of limitations? It says self-reported data cannot be independently verified, right? In other words, you cannot verify to say, definitely, does this person who have chosen neutral agree with the statement or do not agree with the statement? But at the end of the day, this data also need to be used. So you need to make a choice, okay? So you must take what the people say in the data collection instrument, right? That's why we say They have given you their response. It's up to you as a researcher, but the writing up is also going to be there. All right. Remember that you have 3 Likert scale now. You need to tell us in your writing up, where are you going to position this number 2, which is the option of neutral. If you say you're going to position it to the right, to the left, and you group it with those who say they agree, it's fine. It means all the neutrals are going to position like that. But that needs to come in your writing up. And I've said there, e.g., mostly participants indicate the middle option. If you've given the one which you call it not sure or neutral, to please the researcher. And they always do that, okay, most of the time. Lack of prior research studies on the topic could also be a limitation, all right? And I've given that with an with a purpose. Why is this a limitation? There was one of the students who was writing about the progressed learners. I think it was even before COVID. I remember we used to have this face-to-face workshop with the students by then. She was writing about progressed learners, and it was somewhere in 2018, 2019, before COVID, all right? Even though COVID came in 2019, but in South Africa started to have these lockdowns and all of this in 2020. But she was writing about progressed learners. And it was one of the limitations because in fact, I don't know how far the student went with the writing up, I don't know, but I was anticipating that hopefully if she completed her master's, she could have indicated that as a limitation because she had a problem with accessing sources, information, especially within the South African context in regards to progressed learners. So it's a limitation. She was not able to get literature in South Africa because no one has written about progressed learners by then in South Africa. The only literature she has, it was just sort of a circular from the department. But no authors have written about that. And it was a good study. Okay? But think about this now. If you can just fast forward it. Think about COVID, right? All of us, I think most of us knew that we had the last pandemic we have. It was, I think it was in 1918, somewhere there. That was the last one before COVID. Because we are told that pandemics, the researchers are telling us that pandemics, they always happen after 100 years. All right? If they are correct, I don't know. All right? But basically, we're anticipating another pandemic in the next 100 years, if they are correct. But when you look at that one, which happened in 1918, some of the institutions were already there in South Africa. You can just go and check for yourself. This institution was there already by 1918. It was already there. Even though it was not called UNISA, okay, it was called Cape something, but it was already there. Okay. So when you do research, you always want to tap on that available information to say, I want to look at COVID-19 in regards to data and also the pandemic, which happened in 1918, all right, which was also a big pandemic by then. So I want to look at the difference between the two. Then we want to check the literature. There was not so much literature about the pandemic which happened in 1918. There was not so much. I've done one presentation around that, where I was looking at the good, the bad, and the ugly of COVID-19. And I have to look at tapping on some resources or literature from 1918. There was not so much which was written. But just think about now. In the next pandemic which is coming, those who will be writing about that pandemic, they will have more resources and literature to work with. Because there's so much which have been written about COVID-19 in the form of literature in this 3 years or 4 or 5 years. So much. So it means now, going forward, those who will be doing their research in the next pandemic, they won't have a problem in regards to the available of information as a limitation. They'll be able to have lot of sources to tap on and to use when they're writing their stuff up. So what I'm trying to say is that sometimes it could be an issue of a topic. Sometimes it could be an issue of not available resources or information. It could also be a limitation. All right. The other one could be an issue of access. Okay. I think when I'm giving this and trying to explain these examples, which can be part of your limitations, you are now getting clear and understanding that why do I argue to say I can't include limitations in my research proposal. I'll include them when I do my research report. Issue of access, it could be one of the limitations. So I can't write in my research proposal to say one of the limitation is access, where I will have a challenge in accessing my participant or being allowed to reach my participant. In other words, you are projecting, right? To say that will happen. What will happen? What will say if that does not happen after you got your ethical clearance and you start to write your research report? You can't change that. So my argument comes from that standpoint. But let's look at access as one of the limitations. It says, in case whereby your study depends on having access to people or organization or documents. I think we've spoken about access a lot when we were talking about ethics last week. It's one of the limitation. And remember that if you don't have access, there's a lot of gatekeeping as one of the limitations. You are not going to collect that because people are stopping you. So if it's one of the limitation, an issue of access due to gatekeeping, you also include it in your limitation. So look, one of the limitations was an issue of access. There was a lot of gatekeeping. And maybe that's the reason why you are not able to collect much data as you needed as a research. So that when we read it, we'll be able to see it. Maybe we can put as one of the recommendation, right? As one of the future studies to say maybe the future scholars or researchers, when they do similar studies, they must make sure that they work with the issue of access and gatekeeping in advance. Okay? Maybe it's an issue of longitudinal effects. Ensure that the problem you have chosen doesn't require an expensive amount of time. That an issue of time comes as a limitation. Okay? Cultural and other types of bias could also be a limitation. Think about this, colleagues. I'm doing research. I'm coming from humanities. I'm just making an example. Then I'm doing a study where I want to get the perceptions of those young men who goes to the, I don't know what you call it in English, all right? But it's a cultural, it's a traditional cultural thing where they go to the mountains and I'm being taught about manhood and all of this. Think about if I'm doing that type of
initiation school.
Thank you. All right, thank you for that. Think about if you are doing that type of research about those young ones who go for the initiation schools. You are going to have a lot of limitations around that because there's a lot of the limitation is going to come up. There is going to be an issue of lack of sufficient information. It becomes a limitation because they're not going to share most of the aspects with you. I don't know if nowadays they do that, but I know that most of the time they don't share some of the information. Even the ladies also, by the way, they also have their own way of doing it in some of the cultures, all right? They don't share some of the information. Then it can come up one of the limitations in your study. The language barrier could also be a limitation, all right? Maybe for you to access certain communities like the indigenous communities when you conduct your research and you collect your data and also you do your interviews and so on. Language could be maybe one of the limitations, the language barriers. Then we expand why language barriers is a limitation. In other words, like I was saying, there is no study where there is no limitation. And one of the limitations which I've seen most of my students, it's an issue of time. But the students are not able to complete their research studies because of lack of time. Some of them are working and so on. They are employed on a full-time basis. It comes a limitation. The other one is a matter of cost, which I think I've included it somewhere in one of the examples. All right, let's quickly go on the chart. I think there's some point on the chart. It's only one. Mpacha, what I was saying there? If online survey has been advised due to COVID-19 regulations, and now I find that it becomes difficult for me to obtain email addresses of my participants. I think the best way, which I can advise you to do, when you write your, especially your research proposal, try not to use one. Try not to indicate only one mode on how you're going to collect your data. Right? Maybe use hybrid. We call it hybrid.
Yeah, but
Right? Maybe indicate that you are going to collect data face-to-face and also online. Because if you rely in one mode, if that mode has a challenge, then it also hampers you not to collect data. But like we are saying, I think, but if you have that challenge, all right, where, for example, you're not able to get the email data of your participants and so on, my advice to you is that you need to liaise with your supervisor, so that if maybe you have to change a minor mode in your data collection methods or approach, you are able to do that. But the supervisor must be aware to say, now I have a problem with getting my emails from my participants. How about if I arrange for face-to-face, or I go there and do face-to-face data collection with them? So that change could be put nicely in your research report. So the supervisor will advise you on how to phrase the type of a change in your research report. Because I always say, whatever you want to change from the ethical clearance, the supervisor must be involved. Please, guys, involve your supervisor. Don't do it alone. Okay? All right, someone says there in Tsako, if the study focuses on a specific Gauteng municipality and the selected topic does not have sufficient relevant literature, how does one go about finalizing the study, especially the literature review chapter? Remember that your literature review, all right, you are not only focusing on your context literature, right? It should come from global. Could be coming from, for example, international communities, from the continent, and so on. So it doesn't stop you. And that's why we say to you guys, I don't know if you know about this. When you do literature review, it's whereby you read about literature in regards to your study. Then from there, you narrow it down to your context. All right? Most of the time we say your context should be South Africa. And if you realize that there's not much written, or there's nothing written about this aspect in the South African context, then it becomes a gap in your literature. That's why when you do literature study, we want to see the gap. All right? That's a gap which you need to tap on. That's why we say research is about identifying a gap. Now you identify a gap in this literature to say, this topic is not been written in South Africa. It's where you come in as a researcher now. Okay? So in your case, you focus more on the literature which is available internationally and within the continent. Then you indicate the gap. Right? Then in your limitations, it's where you indicate that one of the limitations, it was the accessibility of maybe of information or lack of information, because there's no much people have written about this topic within the South African context. Then you put it as a limitation there. In other words, it doesn't stop you to write the section of literature review. You have to write it. Like I was saying, is that literature review is not only about getting literature from the South African context. No. All right, it's a literature about the topic itself. It that literature can come from the intellectual world or also from the continent and so on. Are we then saying in research proposal, one must include section on delimitation and the thesis include delimitations or both? Basically, in your research report, remember that, guys, let me just put it this way. Your research proposal, you have all those things, is it? Your aim, your objectives, and you name them, methodology, and so on. Then you are going to have delimitation. Then you describe what delimitations are. Briefly, it's a proposal, by the way. And if you want to engage one delimitation, you engage it. All right? Then from there, now we have been given ethical clearance. You write your research report now. Your research report, your chapter 1, it is your research proposal, which you now convert it. It's either in the present tense or in the past tense. Remember that in your research proposal, it was in the future tense. So in your research report, you either use present tense or past tense. You use one of the two. You don't use both of them. Okay? Then from there, you'll have a section also there in your chapter 1, when you write your research report, which you are going to call it delimitations. Then you talk about what delimitations are in chapter 1, all right? And briefly indicate those. Or alternatively, you can take your research proposal the way it is, right? And put it as your chapter 1 in your research report. But what you need to do, you just need to change the tenses, all right? Remember, it was in the future tense. Now we are writing a report. It's either you change the tense of your research proposal into present tense or into past tense. You choose one of the two, is it? Then you put information the way it is. You don't change anything. Then when you go to your chapter 3 now in your research report, which is about research methodology most of the time, it's whereby you'll have a section on delimitations and a section on limitations. Now you expand, right? Remember that maybe in your chapter 1 under delimitation, you have maybe 2 sentences or 3 sentences, maybe a paragraph, if I can put it that way. Now, when you go to chapter 3, you expand. In other words, I don't want to see 1 paragraph. I want to see more, because now you give a further report to say, all right, the limitations were this and that and that. Then you describe those delimitations. Then you say the limitations were this and that, and you describe those limitations. You can also give what the different authors are defining these 2 concepts. I can start with the first one and say, according to so-and-so, delimitations is this and that and that. Whereas so-and-so also agree with this author about describing this delimitation as this and this. Then you say the next part or the next paragraph, we say the delimitation for these studies are the following. Then you indicate those delimitations and so on. I think now you understand the writing up now, colleagues, all right? I think I've set them all for them. Let's move quickly now. I wish to do insert the cases we have received as an organization. I don't understand that word. Insect, what's that? Okay, it's fine. Okay, let me just quickly look. You say we have 3 cases of ladies murdered by uncles, children. I don't understand what you're saying there, or I'll give you a chance. Just wait. Good morning. Let me just finish quickly. Morning. Let me just finish quickly.
This is Tembega sending a question.
Just wait. Just wait, Tembega.
Okay.
Just wait. No, thank you. Thank you. Right. Let me just read the other chart, then I'll come to you. No, I don't know what you're saying now. Also, Nzako, I'm lost there. Okay. Tembega, come in quickly.
Doctor,
Yes.
I'm based in KZN, and we have received cases of incest. Incest is relationship sexual abuse that happens between family members, and mostly it is uncles and fathers mothering their own children. We have very old cases and very recent cases, and then from those cases we have 3 or 4 cases of young ladies who have been mothered by their fathers or their uncles. And I think the oldest child could be he could be 5 years or 6 years of age now, and the rest are below the ages of 3. So that is my case, my interest area. But now the problem is that most of our cases, they are scattered in cases, and they're not based in like in one area. Maybe you find like one case is from Msinga, we have Nongoma, things like that. That cases we have received.
What's your question about this background?
So my
what
question,
you want me to?
my question is there a possibility where I can just do the research in this area? Because now I feel it's not specifically on one area, because now I need to target an area if I were to do this case. But now it's just that the cases, they vary in terms of occurrences. They're not in one area where I can identify it as an issue in the specific area.
No, you are allowed, by the way. Remember that when you spoke about delimitations, you are the one who's deciding in which area you're going to conduct your research on. You can decide to say, for example, my study is not only going to be based in Gauteng province only. I'm going to do this study in 3 provinces. So in other words, when you apply for ethical clearance, you need to identify those areas and so on. You are allowed to do that. We are not saying that your research study should be in one specific area. No. But remember that sometimes there could be, if you justify it, and why we say we expect our students to do their studies in one area, we also look at the level of their study, especially if they are doing their masters. We say, why do you decide to do your masters and collect data in 6 provinces? What's the reason? If you can get data in 1 province or in 1 district. But if you justify in your case, in regards to the cases you are talking about here in your studies, to say, look, these cases are happening sporadic. They are not happening in one area. When you apply for ethical clearance, you have to indicate. So if you have applied it through the ethical clearance, if you apply for permission and they gave you ethical clearance permission for one area, now you realize that no, I can't collect the data in this one area because these cases are happening in other areas. Then your supervisor now comes in. You liaise with the supervisor so that you can expand the scope of your data collection, but there should be a writing up around that. Because remember, we always say to you, you must stick to the ethical clearance which you have been given. But if you have a minor change and you justify that minor change, definitely your study will be able to be accepted. That's my advice around that.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I think we need to move on now. The last one says, all right. In a situation whereby I find that data collected from pilot is valuable for the study more than the original participant, am I allowed to support data from original? No, you are not allowed. Remember that a pilot study is a pilot study. That data, you are not going to use it when you conduct the actual research of the actual participant. You are not going to use that. But in your writing up, remember that, colleagues. All right? In your writing up, in your research report, you have in your research methodology, there is a section which says pilot study. If you have done pilot study, then you explain your pilot study. You can even indicate to how many participants did you give the questionnaire to, what were the results, and so on. But remember that you cannot use your pilot study data for your chapter of on your results and findings and analysis. You are not going to use that. Okay? You can analyze your pilot study. like I've said, when you're speaking about the pilot study and also quantitative methods, you can analyze it if you want to do some test, especially to check if the statements in your data collection instrument, like your questionnaire, are talking to the construct or the variables. You can analyze that so that when you do the findings, you may find that you avoid an issue whereby some of the statements will be loading to some of the variables and so on. That's why you do that analysis via the SPSS and so on. You can do that. But the actual data which you are going to talk as the results and findings are the one which you have collected from your actual participants. Okay? All right, let's quickly look at this example. The simple way of understanding limitations, colleagues. The writing up, I think we've done a little bit of writing up by now. How do you write that part of limitations in both, especially in your research report? I'm using the same title there, the one I've used for delimitations. The research title is Perceptions of the School Governing Bodies on Learners Bullying, a case of Tshwane North District, Gauteng Province. All right. When I write that section of limitation, especially in my chapter 3, where I will have a section on limitation, I can put in this way. But remember that, guys, before I can put the limitation itself, maybe I could have described or gave a definition what limitations are according to various authors. Then I'll say one of the limitation is that it's a limitation of finance. Then I'll say I can write it as follows: the limitation of this study is finance, since the researcher is not based within the Tshwane North District. Hence, to reach the identified school where data is collected, the researcher must bear transport costs. In other words, I justify why finance, or you can say money or cost, is the reason to be regarded as a limitation. You can do the same thing with access. You can do the same thing with, for example, where we spoke about gatekeeping, lack of knowledge from the researcher also about the subject, the subject which the researcher is conducting research on could also be limitation. So the writing up should be clear to the reader. Okay. All right. I think we have already spoken about the differences between the delimitation and limitation. I think the main one, which I always like it, is that one of the difference is that you do not have control in your limitations. The limitations are not under your control, but the delimitations, you can control them. Okay. But let's look at some of these differences. We are saying the delimitations are features that can be controlled. We've spoken about that one, but limitations, they cannot be totally controlled. All right. Delimitations aim to narrow the scope of the study, but limitations, they are difficult to contain. All right. They need to exist for your study to be valid, essential, credible. All right. In other words, we say there's no research which does not have any limitations. All right. Yeah, let's look at assumptions. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on assumptions because there are very few students who always indicate assumptions in their study. Please, colleagues, don't confuse assumptions and hypothesis. They are two different things, okay? They are not the same. Let's look at the types of assumptions. We have what you call the universal assumptions, beliefs that are assumed to be true by large part of society, though it is not possible to test such an assumption. E.g., a belief that there is a supernatural power which governs this universe. I think all of us would believe in that. But if I may ask you, has that assumption been tested? I don't know. Okay. Assumptions based on theories. It's one of the type of assumptions. Those are assumptions which are sometimes drawn from different theories. In other words, you have a theory. For example, you have an assumption which is drawn from a theory of Ubuntu. All right. which you can assume that if you apply that theory, it also assists in contributing to their communities or societies, all right? So the other assumption is that if that theory is being applied in our communities, we are able to assist each other and we are able to take care of each other. It's just an assumption which needs also to be tested, all right? Assumptions needed to conduct a research, all right? Those are the common sense assumptions developed to conduct a certain research study. We always have these assumptions. I don't know, I don't know, to say e.g., that's an example of an assumption. I'm not sure if the people who are in science have done a study, an empirical study on that. That assumptions which says diabetic disease is more common among males as compared to females. I'm not sure about that, colleagues, but I think it's, for me, still as an assumption. I'm not saying because I'm a male, but maybe if I can, maybe those of you who have read widely about this aspect, maybe it's not an assumption. We have what you call the warranted assumptions. These are stated along with evidence to support, e.g., regular praying success, since it boosts morale. Okay, interesting one also. Unwarranted assumption also. The example, the one who says God exists everywhere in the universe. Okay, basically, we have different types of assumptions. Okay, so when you do your writing up, in your assumption, tell us what assumptions are and which assumption are you bringing in, whether you are bringing an universal assumption and so on, and indicate that assumption, all right? We are writing up. Assumptions are preconceived ideas or conclusions. They guide your research. They tend to drive your curiosity. They tend also to drive the whole idea of the study. Why is there a need to acknowledge assumptions? To assume if the writer and the reader are on the same page. What are assumptions? They are mental model, a way of seeing things. In other words, you are able to see things from a different perspective. That's why we have an assumptions. It's also a framework of thoughts or beliefs through which one's words or reality is interpreted. An example used to define a phenomena. Sometimes we use to define a certain phenomena, and we always sometimes use an assumption, all right? I think here it's just a definition of assumptions, where it says parts of a study design you cannot control. That must be true for the study to be valid. For example, you can control whether your sample or population is appropriate, but you cannot control if the selected population are the right people who are going to give you the information which you need for this study. I think the last colleague on the chart, you said what will happen if the data you collected from the pilot study, it's more user-friendly or it's more usable than the one which you have collected for your actual participant. Then it comes, and when you look at the assumptions, it also relates to the assumptions. To say, for example, if you assume and you do a pilot study, it should not be an assumption to say, when you go and you roll out your entire questionnaire to a real participant, you are going to get the same results, right? All right. Briefly, here's the difference. Remember, I've said that there's a difference between assumption and hypothesis. Look at what assumptions are. All right, let's look at the hypothesis. All right, hypotheses are predictions. Hypotheses can be statistically tested and may be accepted or rejected. Okay, remember that we said we are using two main types of hypotheses. All right, we use the one which you say it's a null hypothesis. We also use what you call the if and then hypothesis. The null hypothesis, we always denote it with HO, but the if and then hypothesis, we denote it with H1. So all these two types of hypotheses, they can be tested, right? If you say to me, you have a hypothesis, which you call it if and then hypothesis. An example, if I drink too much coffee during the course of the day, I won't be able to fall asleep. It's an if and then hypothesis. So that type of hypothesis need to be tested. But an assumption, it does not need to be tested. It's just you assume, okay? Like those assumptions which I've given to you there. Some of them, they don't need to be tested. For example, if we say God exists through the universe, there's no need for tests for that, okay? Because it's not a hypothesis, it's an assumption. And also a hypothesis, they predict a relation between variables and statistical tested to conclude the study. That's why when you do the writing up of the assumptions, especially in our research proposal, we just put all those assumptions, all right? What are the assumptions in regarding to your study, okay? But you don't need to test them, by the way. You can still have, in other words, in order, if you want to test something, you need to have your hypothesis down. You have assumptions, and also you need to include the hypothesis. Then the hypotheses are the one which you are going to test. I want us to spend a few minutes on this exercise. It's quite a lengthy exercise. Let's quickly look at it now. Here is an example of research question. This is a research question. It's very long, all right, or lengthy if you want to put it in that way. What does it say? It says, to what extent are social relationships between selected high school students, graduation years 2017 to 2020. In other words, we are focusing on those who graduated between 2017 and 2020 at the X school in Tembisa, influenced by the beauty premium, and how does it impact the distinction of trust among students within the social relationship. In other words, what we are looking here, we're looking on how the beauty premium relates or affects students in regards to their social relationship, right? But before we can go further, let's try to understand these concepts first, right? So that when we do this exercise, you understand what these concepts means, which are coming from the research questions. The first one is an issue of social relationship. There it is there also. It's any relationship that is between two or more individuals. Okay? Beauty premium, what does it mean in this context? The theory that attractive people are generally regarded as more amicable, trustworthy, intelligent, and thus receive more favorable treatments than less attractive people. Sorry, colleagues, that's according to Lee and Zhu. They argue that in regards to this concept of beauty premium, to say basically those people who are more attractive, right, are those who, and they always receive more favors or treatments, are those who are intelligent, trustworthy, amicable. Trust also, we need to define what trust is according to these research questions. They believe that the person trusted will do what is expected from them. Physical attractiveness also as a concept there. The degree to which an individual is aesthetically pleasing. In context of this research assumption, physical attractiveness could be evaluated based on a Likert scale, let's say from 1, which indicates to most attractive, right? From 1 to be less attractive. Then if you move to 5, it gives you most attractive. Okay, so let's pair this description of this concept, which are coming from this exercise, when we are working on this exercise in the next slide. All right. Now, based on this exercise, here's the exercise again. I say, based on this exercise, formulate your research question. Sorry, formulate your research assumption. What assumption can you bring? if you can bring only one assumption and make sure that it's short, all right? Based on this research question, what assumption can you bring? What are you assuming, all right? Make sure that the sentence or the assumption is short, is written short. I like the assumptions, eh? Let's take a few of them, colleagues. Let's take the first one. There are social relationship between selected students at X school of Tembisa. Okay, interesting. Students in high schools in Tembisa are influenced by the beauty premium. Okay, interesting also. The attractive students are likely to succeed. Okay. But we have also there, the distribution of trust is based on the social relationship of the students. Interesting, colleagues, eh? There is a distribution of trust among students within their social relationships. It's just an assumption, is it? Thanks for bringing those assumptions. But can you see that sometimes some of the writings from the authors are more biased, okay? And this one, definitely, that assumption to say those who are doing well and they always get favors, and in other words, we're looking at their beautiness and so on, they become more successful. It's an assumption, okay? Doesn't mean that if you are described as this person, you'll be able to be successful, okay? So thanks for that assumptions. I want to look at this one. It says there is a distribution of trust among students within their social relationship. I think I've read that one. Okay, thanks for your contribution, guys. Can we move to the next slide? Okay, let's summarize quickly. I think the summary which I'm putting here, 1, delimitations, purpose, to determine the parameters or scope of the study, control, there is a level of control over where to draw the boundaries. Where do you write your delimitations? That it's in your chapter 1 most of the time, all right? Whether chapter 1 of your research proposal or chapter 1 of your research report. But when you go to chapter 3, you can expand. Some of the students, they put it in their chapter 1, some of them in their chapter 3. Limitation, the purpose to determine the weakness associated to a decision made in the study. Control, difficult to control, but some can be addressed in the study. Most of the time, we position them on a chapter 3. Assumption also, we position them mostly on your chapter 1. And yeah, most of the time, position them on chapter 1 or in your chapter 3. But like I've said, very few students, when they write their research report, they talk about assumptions, okay? I just want to assist Rilebogile. I think if you are not able to come with a research title for your study, one colleague has indicated that maybe you need to visit some of the completed dissertation and thesis, which are more talking to your preferred study area. Somewhere at the end, they talk about future research. You can also come with a topic from there. Or alternatively, you visit I think under each college, there is this focus area document which has been published there. All right. If you can go just maybe on under UNISA, I think so. Or maybe you can go under Google Scholar then, or Google, then you search the College of, for example, if you're in education, just say College of Education, then you say focus areas, research focus area for 2024. They'll be able to give you all the possible focus areas there. In others, they'll talk about ICT, they'll talk about in education, various topics, you know. So you align your research topic based on that broad focus concept. Then you narrow it down so that it suits your desired research topic or title. So that's how you normally do it. Okay. I think that's how you can come with a topic. But remember that as we are going through in our different spaces, always have something which you want to research about. If you are in education, for example, if you are in education, there are a lot of things you can research about in education. There are lots. Okay, that's my understanding. Okay, so you look around your school. If you identify that there's a gap or there's something which become problematic, you can convert it into a research. But I'm not saying that you must come and collect data from your school. But you can say maybe it could be a phenomenon. All right, maybe it's an issue of saying maybe you want to look at the SGPs. Are they doing the right thing? Are they well trained? There are a lot of things you can do. But yeah, I'm not trying to frame, but I'm just thinking a little bit more about that. But just quickly look at if there are any questions. You can also raise your hand now if there's someone, or you can put it in the chat, then you can respond to it. All right. I can see there's someone here. Okay, let's look at the chart. I just want to know when to change a topic if you see that you could experience some limitations. Yeah, that's it's a difficult question, this one. Why do you anticipate that you'll have limitations? You see, you can change your topic at any time. The only time you cannot change your topic if you have already been granted ethical clearance. You can't change your topic. If you want to change your topic, it means you need to talk to the supervisor and do a reapplication. Then you apply for another topic. And remember, when you apply to research on another topic, you are going to submit another research proposal again. It's going to go through the same process where the research ethics committee is going to sit down and look at your research proposal. So in other words, what you're saying to me, you are going to suspend writing up your research report because you still have to go through all this process when you go and submit your research proposal. Then the research proposal is going to be looked by the research committee. Then the research committee is going to give you feedback. And if they're happy about the topic and so on, then they grant you ethical clearance. Can you see now? But if you have not been granted ethical clearance, you have not applied for it, you can change your topic at any time. I can write a topic today and change it tomorrow, or write a topic now and change it in the next 5 minutes. All right? Because you are brainstorming. But if you have a final topic and you submitted it and you've been granted ethical clearance to change the topic, contact your supervisor because somewhere you need to reapply again. Can you just clarify, Bongani, quickly?
Oh, yeah. So, no, thank you, Doc. I just wanted to know, in terms of when you do your Delphi study, is there a requirement for me to sort of do a focus study before I sort of roll out to the experts or something? That's the first question. And then the second, the other one, what sort of assumptions and limitations that you would expect when you use this Delphi method?
Okay. Remember.
Yep.
Remember, your limitations are all the things which you are supposed to share with the reader. You say, when I was conducting my research using this type of methods, these were my limitations. You have to share them. You cannot preempt them. You are the one who's supposed to tell us, by the way. Well, I'm sorry to say that. You are the one, because remember, you are going to do your research now. Then you report about the limitation of using this type of methods. You tell us 1, 2, 3, those were limitations. The pilot study, you are allowed to do a pilot study for any research you are doing, whether you use any method. You are allowed to do. By the way, what's the purpose of a pilot study? I always say to my students, when you do a pilot study, especially if you are going to collect data using certain instrument, that's the purpose of doing pilot study. You want to test this instrument. To say, all right, I have this instrument. I want to check if it's going to be usable when I roll it out to the entire participants. So I choose this group of participants. Maybe there could be 5 or 4. I choose them, then I test this data collection instrument with them. That's a pilot study. Then from there, whatever results I get, I note them so that I'll go back and refine, all right, and rework on my data collection instrument. So that when I roll it out to the entire population, all those things which were problematic during the pilot study have been sorted out. That's the reason of doing pilot study. Okay, so you can do pilot study even though you are using a Delphi method. It's fine. You pilot to the participant. That's it. That's all what you want to do. So it doesn't stop you to do a pilot study. And a pilot study, I remember we spoken about it either last week or the week before last week, where it tells you if you do quantitative, the suggested amount, the sample size for piloting in quantitative are this number, and for quantitative, but remember that, colleagues, in regards to quantitative, definitely we are looking for more than 30 and above participants. The reason why is that sometimes when you do quantitative, you want also to do some tests, is it? I've spoken about them today also, to check if I have the statements and the variables or the constructs, all the statements are talking to the relevant constructs. Then it means now when I pilot this data collection instrument, I must give it to more people. So that when I do my test, maybe I'm going to use maybe SPSS, all right? I will be able to get the results to say maybe most of these statements in these constructs are not loading to other constructs. That's the purpose of doing a test, okay? So yeah, my answer is simple. Conduct your research, then at the end, tell us about the limitations you have encountered using this method. Maybe the limitations about the method, describe what limitations are those. Maybe it could be 1 or 2. Maybe we find that the limitation is not only about the method. Maybe you have other limitations, okay? But if you have one limitation, which was the method we have used, it's fine, okay? And remember that, like I've said, I always say to my students, when you write up the limitation in your research report, especially, put them in a point form, not paragraphs, just a point. The first one, it was methodology. What was the limitation about this methodology? You describe it, that's it. Okay, I think I've tried to answer your question. Offense, what are you saying here? You mentioned that assumptions are not statistically tested. How are warranted assumption provided with evidence? Where does the evidence come from? Well, basically, my understanding is that most of the time, when you come to assumptions, why do you have to test your assumptions? Well, other people, they argue that they test them. But I say, instead of having something to test, why don't you come with hypothesis? Okay, but yeah, I understand where does the evidence come? Okay, if you look at the example I've given under warranted assumption, it's just an example, colleagues. Okay, all right. But what I'm trying to say is that we need to understand assumptions as something which we just assume. Okay, and there's nothing wrong to have an assumption. But what I've seen, I'll repeat myself again. What I've seen, most of the students, when they put their assumptions in their research reports, they always follow their assumptions with hypotheses. And they always test their hypothesis. Okay? But it's fine. If you differ with me, I don't take any offense. I agree with you. Thank you for that. Thanks for the presentation. All right. Does one have to seek permission from an organization when you conduct? No. The only time you can seek for colleagues, if I'm saying you are not supposed to seek permission when you conduct pilot study. It doesn't mean that you wake up this morning on Monday, then go to that school and say, guys, welcome Kupega, I'm here to conduct pilot study. No, you need to approach the organization in the right way and ask a permission from them and explain who you are and what you are doing. They may ask you to say, do you have any letter from the Department of Education? Then you say to them, no, I don't have a letter. The only letter I have is this letter, which they've given me permission to collect data in these schools. But because I'm just testing my questionnaire, I've chosen your school. Your school is not part of the schools which have been identified in the permission. So that's why the requirement does not ask me to get permission to come to your school, but I'm asking a go ahead from you as a headmaster. If you are not busy, you can have an appointment and I can come on this day at this time and so on. In that way, I think if one school decline you, school number 5 will allow you to do the pilot study. All right, because other schools say no, we're busy, because they're always busy. Okay. But what I'm trying to say, you don't need to apply for any permission, but you need to get a go-ahead from the institution itself.
I just wanted to double check something. Your last slide, the summary on delimitations, limitations, and assumption. The assumption part, you didn't specify which chapter does it belong to. No, not this one. I think the very last one.
Yes, I'm aware of that. I've just written chapter.
Yes, yeah.
Yes, I'm aware of that. And yeah, basically, why I didn't want to be more specific, like I was saying that most of the students, most of them, sometimes they don't even include assumptions. Okay. But those who include assumptions, others, they put them under chapter 1, others, they include them under chapter 3. Okay. So that's how they normally do. But in most cases, I've seen them, they put them under chapter 3, those who include assumptions. Then they follow those assumptions with their hypothesis.
Okay.
So, yeah. All right.
Highly appreciate. Thank you.
No problem with that. Okay. Guys, thank you for attending. And I'm hoping that we'll be able to see each other next week. But then, yeah, all the best. Thank you and bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.